Maracaibo, Venezuela. Whether it was a defiant act of protests, or the grim realization that nothing would change, Venezuelans appeared to skip Sunday's presidential elections en masse. And that decision all but guaranteed that embattled President Nicolás Maduro will rule the shattered country through 2025, even as dozens of nations, including the United States, are calling the election a sham. Although official results hadn't been released, few believed that Maduro's two rivals, Henri Falcón, the former governor of Lara State, or Javier Bertucci, an evangelical pastor, stood a chance. While some polls showed either man could have beaten the deeply unpopular Maduro given normal turnout, an opposition boycott destroyed that hope, said Jesus Seguías, with the Datencorp polling firm. Even if Maduro, 55, were prepared to engage in outright ballot stuffing to win the race, the elevated abstention made it unnecessary, he said in a statement. From the onset Sunday, it was clear that this was no regular vote, as social media was flooded with pictures of desolate polling stations. State-run television used tight shots to hide meager lines. An exit poll by Meganalysis estimated that only 17% of the 21 million registered voters went to the polls, compared to 80% during the last presidential election in 2013. Exiled opposition leader Antonio Ledesma called it an epic act of civil disobedience, and anti-government rallies were held in dozens of cities around the world, including in Miami. Even so, the government crowed about a massive turnout and was likely to report much higher numbers. The debate over the true tally will likely rage for days, but it's clear that Maduro's hopes for an unassailable show of public support crumbled amid domestic and international condemnation. At the San Vicente de Paul school in the western city of Maracaibo, where some 7,000 people are registered, there were no lines or crowds as in previous elections. It's not a secret that Maduro is going to win because of this, said Maria Carolina Fuenmayer, 30, as she gestured toward the empty voting station. I think the opposition is making a mistake. If we want to get rid of this government, and they give us the chance to vote, why don't we take it? That question has haunted the race since Maduro first called for snap elections in January. With many of his main rivals in jail, sidelined or exiled, the opposition decried the vote as illegitimate and deeply unfair. To participate, they argued, was to give the election a veneer of legitimacy. We've been clear, yes to elections and voting, but no to this because it's electoral fraud, said Victor Marquez Carrao, a member of the Broad Front for Venezuelan Liberation, a coalition of opposition forces. While the opposition was largely sitting out the race, the administration was scrambling to get its people to the polls. State-run media urged Venezuelans to vote, and stations in government strongholds remained open hours after their scheduled 6 p.m. closing time. Electoral watchdogs said people were being bussed in, and some people were being offered boxes of food, a tempting bribe amid widespread hunger, to vote. Read more, how Maduro uses empty stomachs to fill ballot box. Earlier in the day, the government insisted the lack of crowds was a mirage, that the voting system was simply so efficient and fast that lines didn't have a chance to form. The whole world should know that millions are voting freely, because the vote is an instrument of justice, Maduro wrote on Twitter. In Venezuela, it's the people who elect the president. The international community has been treating the race as a foregone conclusion. The United States, the European Union, Canada and the Lima groups, a bloc of 12 Latin American nations, have said they won't recognize the results. Maduro is not deceiving anyone. Senator Marco Rubio, RFL, wrote on Twitter. The world is watching this farce. I join the people of Venezuela who are tirelessly fighting to restore freedom and democracy. Even if Maduro is confirmed the winner, his troubles aren't over. The country is being hammered by hyperinflation and food and medicine shortages. The international community has been slapping officials with sanctions and stripping their visas. Oil production is collapsing, and there's been an exodus of those escaping the hardship and hunger. The Venezuelan diaspora held anti-government rallies in dozens of cities around the world Sunday. In Miami, about 100 protesters gathered to wave flags and denounce the government. Carlos Vecchio, the coordinator of the Voluntad Popular Opposition Party, called the elections a fraud in progress. "We're witnessing what I call 21st century slavery," he said. They are using Venezuelans' hunger to bribe them to go to an event, so that Maduro the dictator can legitimize himself. In Colombia, where more than 600,000 Venezuelans are thought to have fled in recent years, a few hundred gathered in the capital chanting, "Fraud," and "We want to go home." Alejandra Torres, a 37-year-old political activist, said she left Venezuela 3 weeks ago because her 4 young daughters didn't have a future there. Torres said opposition forces inside the country are weak and demoralized, and that the country needs help from abroad. "We have to try to raise our voices from here, Colombia, because in Venezuela it's impossible," she said. "Our hands are tied there, very tied." Human rights groups say there are more than 200 political prisoners in Venezuela, and a government crackdown has made it unlikely that the protests that rattled the nation in 2014 and 2017 will return in the short term. U.S. officials and others have suggested that more and more painful sanctions may be coming after the election. How can President Maduro be so thirsty and ambitious for power that he's willing to keep causing so much pain and suffering for his people in order to cling to power? Chilean President Sebastián Piñera wrote on Twitter Sunday. Despite the calls for a boycott, some saw voting as a civic duty. Jesus Carras, a sidewalk vendor in Maracaibo, said he'd gone to vote in the morning, even as his 2 brothers abstained. "It's my duty as a citizen," he said. Maduro has made so many mistakes, but the other candidates are worse. But others saw their refusal to go to the polls as an act of patriotism. "Not voting also expresses an opinion," said Pablo Perez Herrera in Maracaibo. "There's no desire to vote. It's a response to the circumstances." Sonia Osorio, with El Nuevo Herald, contributed to this report.